For most of modern history, Eleanor Roosevelt has been spoken of as a symbol, a towering figure made of dignity and discipline, a first lady who reshaped the role into something fierce, global, and humane. When people talk about her, they mention her work with the United Nations, her fight for democracy, her travels across battlefields during World War II, her championing of human rights. They talk about the icon, the public force, the woman who seemed too large, too polished, too morally upright to ever be touched by anything as messy or vulnerable as desire. But beneath the marble statue history sculpted for her, there was a woman who loved deeply, fiercely, and unexpectedly. And the world is now finally ready to talk about the truth that sat hidden for decades. A love story that began in the shadows of the White House and played out across thousands of letters filled with longing, devotion, and the kind of vulnerability Eleanor Roosevelt never showed the world. This is the story of Eleanor Roosevelt and Lorena Hickok, a forbidden romance once buried, dismissed, or coded away as friendship. But the evidence refuses to stay silent. And now new proof reveals a relationship far more intimate than America ever imagined. It begins in 1932, during Franklin D. Roosevelt's first presidential campaign. Hickok was already a star, one of the most respected reporters in the country, the first woman to ever have her byline on the front page of the New York Times. She was blunt, tough, brilliant, openly butch in an era when that could get you fired, beaten, or worse. But she didn't flinch. She lived her life the way she wanted to, long before the world was ready for her. Her editor sent her to cover the future First Lady, and neither woman had any idea that assignment would change both their lives. Eleanor Roosevelt did not grow up like Hickok. She came from old money, an aristocratic family that believed in composure as a religion and silence as a virtue. Her childhood was polished, privileged, and miserable. She married young, became a mother, and wore every expectation handed to her, until the affair that broke her marriage's emotional core. When her husband Franklin fell in love with her own secretary, Eleanor's world cracked open. She stayed in the marriage, but the emotional warmth, the closeness, the passion, those things evaporated. By the time Hickok walked into her life, Eleanor was a woman starving for something her world didn't allow her to name. Hickok saw it instantly. A woman trying to carry a whole nation but quietly collapsing under the weight of her own loneliness. And Eleanor saw something too. Someone who didn't flinch. Someone who wasn't intimidated by her. Someone who treated her not as the future First Lady, but as a person. Their letters began that year, 1932. Then they kept going and going and going. Today we have 2,336 of them. Letters that were hidden for decades in 18 boxes, sealed in the Franklin D. Roosevelt Library, untouched until a researcher opened them in 1978 and accidentally uncovered one of the most intimate archives in American history. In these letters, Eleanor Roosevelt does not sound like a political icon. She sounds like someone falling in love. "I ache to hold you close," she wrote. "Your ring is of great comfort. I look at it and think, she does love me, or I wouldn't be wearing it." This was not coded language, not polite affection. It was yearning, unmistakable, undeniable. Hickok's letters were just as bold. "I want to put my arms around you and kiss you at the corner of your mouth." The two women sometimes wrote each other twice a day. They wrote when they were together. They wrote when they were apart. They wrote through wars, through elections, through the rise and fall of entire political eras. And in the early years, before the world closed in around them, before secrecy hardened into routine, the letters are undeniably romantic. The press at the time politely called them friends. History textbooks echoed it for decades. Biographers softened it with phrases like emotional intimacy. But these were not the words of friends. These were the words of lovers. Their relationship was so close, so constant, that Hickok eventually gave up her career, one she had fought brutally hard to build, and moved into the White House. Not into a guest room across the hall, not into an office. She moved into a room directly connected to Eleanor Roosevelt's own. Almost none of the White House press corps reported it. Not because they didn't know, but because they lived in an era where some truths were simply too dangerous to speak. To call the First Lady a lesbian, the word itself was scandalous, rarely used even in whispers, would be to brand yourself a political enemy, a pervert, a threat to the nation. And besides, the press already had secrets to protect. They hid Franklin Roosevelt's disability, carefully avoiding mentioning the wheelchair that defined his daily life. They hid his affairs, particularly his long relationship with his secretary, Missy LeHand. If the president's private life was shielded for the sake of the country, the First Ladies would not be exposed either. Franklin Roosevelt almost certainly knew about Eleanor and Hickok. They ate breakfast together. Hickok lived with them. She was everywhere Eleanor was. And for a politician with his own complicated love life, Eleanor's private happiness was not something he was inclined to disrupt. But a romance like theirs, passionate, intense, beautiful, and dangerous, could never stay simple. As the years passed, the flames of their early affair cooled into something deeper but less consuming. Eleanor grew more absorbed in her activism: human rights, women's rights, anti-racism, labor reforms, justice on a global scale. Hickok supported her, guided her, and helped shape her public voice. Historians often say Eleanor Roosevelt became the most powerful First Lady in history. Hickok is part of the reason why. Their love did not die, it changed shape. After 1938, their romance softened into a lifelong companionship, one built on mutual devotion, emotional reliance, and a connection that endured until the day Eleanor Roosevelt died in 1962. But the passion of their early years never disappeared. It simply settled into a quieter, gentler flame. So why did this story stay buried so long? Part of it is the myth of Eleanor Roosevelt, the stern, selfless maternal figure of the nation. Americans preferred her as a symbol of duty, not as a woman who sought affection on her own terms. Part of it is the silence surrounding queer lives in the early 20th century, lives erased, rewritten, or sanitized to keep history comfortable for the people who wrote it. And part of it is the boxes. 18 boxes of letters, sealed until long after both women were gone, waiting for someone curious enough to open them. When they were finally studied, the truth was undeniable. These weren't just political notes. These weren't casual exchanges. These were the emotional footprints of two women who built a private world together, even as the public world turned them into symbols. Playwright Terry Baum didn't trust historians to tell the story honestly, so she went straight to the source. She traveled to the FDR library, held the original letters in her hands, and interviewed people who had known Hickok. What she found was what she had always suspected. The letters were not subtle. They didn't dance around the truth. They confessed it openly. Her play, Hick, a love story, brought the relationship to the stage, earned standing ovations, and forced audiences to confront a version of Eleanor Roosevelt they had never been taught. Not an icon, but a human being. And then came authors like Amy Bloom, who took the real letters, the real facts, the real history, and wove them into a novel that dared to center Eleanor Roosevelt not as a political symbol, but as a woman capable of desire. The story resonated because it revealed something history often hides. Important women are still people. Icons still have hearts. Even the mother of a nation can want to be loved. Eleanor and Hickok's love story wasn't young or glamorous. It wasn't scandalous tabloids or secret hotel rooms. It was a middle-aged romance, built slowly through conversation and long car rides, shared jokes, quiet mornings, handwritten confessions, and the kind of affection you don't expect to find after the world has already told you who you're supposed to be. Their relationship didn't end in fireworks, betrayal, or scandal. It endured. It matured. It settled into something steady and irreplaceable. A friendship layered over a romance layered over a connection that defied the boundaries of its time. And when Eleanor Roosevelt died, the letters stopped, but the proof remained. 2,336 pieces of evidence, 3 decades of intimacy, a love preserved in ink and secrecy, waiting for a future that would finally understand it. History tried to write Eleanor Roosevelt as a symbol. Her letters revealed she was simply human, longing, vulnerable, loving, and loved in return. And sometimes that's the most revolutionary truth of all. So what do you think? We'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Let us know in the comments section. And thanks for watching.